Hello, and welcome to the Logistics Management Podcast Series. My name's Jeff Berman. I'm Group News Editor at Logistics Management Magazine and also the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group. Today, it's a real pleasure to welcome Ken Adamo to our podcast, or I guess I should say welcome back. This is Ken's second time joining us. Ken serves as Chief of Analytics at DAT Freight and Analytics. DAT operates the largest truckload freight marketplace in North America. Transportation brokers, carriers, news organizations, and industry analysts rely on DAT for market trends and data insights derived from 249 million freight matches in 2020 and a database of 110 billion worth of market transactions. DAT has two main business lines. The company operates the industry's largest load board network called DAT1, and it also has a data and analytics operation called DAT IQ that produces real-time analysis and forecasting based on DAT's database of freight transactions contributed by brokers, carriers, and shippers. Ken is responsible for the DAT IQ side of the business, which makes him a great person to talk to for the latest information about where this freight market has been and where it's going. He's also responsible for services, technologies, and partnerships, leveraging the company's vast trove of contributed truckload transaction data, notably DAT RateView. Ken joined DAT in 2019 from FedEx Custom Critical in Uniontown, Ohio, where he was manager of decision science and innovation. And prior to his arrival at DAT, there actually was no formal data analytics organization within the company. Hey, Ken, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Ken, just so the audience knows, you guys put out the truckload volume index every month. So we get to talk from time to time, usually on a monthly basis about that. And a lot of the things covered within that really focus on the what's happening within any given month for truckload spot, contract rates, volumes. So with that sort of a backdrop, Ken, can you talk a little bit about how 2023 ended up and how 2024 has started? Basically, from that guy, sort of how things are looking in terms of spot and contract rates, volumes, etc., across the three different trucking segments, the DAT tracks, of course.
Yeah, so 2023 largely followed a pattern of 2019, which is what we flagged early in the year as probably one of the poorer scenarios you could have modeled, right? That was a year, if you think back, where things opened the year generally at bottom and stayed there most of the year.
Right.
So, that's what we saw across dry van and reefer. So it was depressed rates. Fuel had its ups and downs throughout most of the year. It started high and then started dropping towards the tail half of the year. You saw decreased spot market activity, mainly due to routing guides on the contract market holding very, very strong. So, probably of the three equipment types that we track, flatbed had probably the worst year in terms of rate movement, a year of pretty constant decline. So, it wasn't a great year for spot freight in general across any of the three equipment types. Now,
Yeah.
as seasonally expected, things increased towards the end of the year. And then we had an added boost in January from the polar vortex that gripped much of Northern and Central America, which kept prices a lot higher than they would have typically stayed, seasonally. So that's ebbing back now quite a bit, but it was a nice little boost coming out of the holiday. I think it gave some folks some false hope, though, that things would recover before spring shipping season.
Okay, got it. Interesting. So, now you had talked about how it had been trending along on a sort of a 2019 track when we looked at 2023 on balance. You know, it's hard to believe that we're approaching just in a couple weeks, really, the true onset of the pandemic when we go back to March 2020. It certainly feels longer ago than that. When you look at the market on balance, Ken, have there been any, in your opinion, sort of any resultant shifts in strategies And I guess this is in terms of spot, contract, etc. Strategies taken by carriers or shippers going back to the onset of the pandemic, or if things sort of more or less normalized, because it has been nearly 4 years. Are there any sort of pandemic driven takeaways that are still with us today? That's what I'm trying to ask.
So there's a couple things for sure. You know, the mini bid during COVID, which was code name largely for shortened bid cycles,
Mm-hmm.
was probably the most in vogue concept between shippers and carriers or shippers and brokers. So rates were changing so dynamically, capacity was so hard to secure, service was so hard to protect that shippers drastically shortened their bid cycle. Some as short as every other week. They were rebidding contract freight.
Yeah.
And there was a lot written, there was a lot talked about during that time that things will probably never go back to the way it was pre-COVID, with the annual bid being the king of all.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to today, pandemic in the rear view by a year or two, and the most popular thing is the annual bid.
Yeah.
So, when rates are low, shippers are more than willing to take advantage of locking in low prices for longer terms. I think if you ask most shippers right now, they'd sign a 5-year deal if their capacity providers would allow them to do that.
Okay. Got it.
Um,
Got it. So we kind of come full circle in a sense then. Back to the
yeah,
end.
and it's not like the mini bid went away, right? The mini bid was still there when I was even in industry pricing freight over a decade ago. It was just
Yeah.
more or less referred to as a project, right? You had new lanes maybe appear. Maybe you opened a new distribution center, or you were moving data centers from one location to another. So you opened up a project bid or an amendment to your big annual bid that was different than
Okay.
I think what happened during COVID.
Okay, understood. Interesting. So let's shift gears for a moment, Ken, and let's sort of talk about different things going on within the state of the freight economy. So I was thinking along the lines of things that we've talked about in the past on our monthly calls, as it relates to inflation, inventories and inventory to sale ratio, consumer spending, and we can even throw in industrial production there, although that's more heavily uh, geared towards the DLTL side of things. But when we look at the current state of the freight economy, what's your take on things? I mean, obviously the idea of mixed signals continues to be afloat for sure.
I would say that's a tough one, right? Because we get so many mixed signals at this
Yeah.
point, at this juncture in where we are in the freight cycle. So I think where we sit today, everyone's anticipating the turn. We're certainly not going to go backwards. We're at bottom or
Right.
off bottom, actually, which is good. So I think everyone's looking for reasons to believe one thing or another. So much like the groundhog, right? On Groundhog Day, I think folks were really hoping that the what I believe was mainly driven by weather, the increase in the length of peak rates, they were hoping that would carry through to spring. And the unfortunate reality there is some of the most powerful forces in freight, whether it be spot, contract, even private and dedicated, are the calendar, the freight makeup and mix, as you mentioned, the modes, fuel prices. So a lot of things are what you would almost consider freight centric.
Yeah.
Certainly, the consumer has been strong throughout all of this, despite trying to be talked into being spooked by most business media outlets, right? About a looming recession now coming up on 2 years. I think they've been
Yes.
hyping this recession.
Yeah. The
So,
goalposts keep getting moved, right?
well, yeah, if you predict one for 5 years and one finally happens, you were right.
Yeah.
Um, so I think
Exactly.
when you look at the macro economy and its effect on freight, we saw it. We did see a diminished peak season because of the excess inventories that we see out there. So it certainly does impact things. But I think as we look at it right now, I wouldn't read too much into how PPI or LMI or any of those things impact February, because February is just it's hard to outrun the calendar.
Yeah.
And
No.
February is a slow month for freight, in any way you slice it.
No. Absolutely. And then just as a sort of follow-up to that, Ken, a big narrative, you heard it on earnings calls, you obviously see it in the media and in other places too. Was the term freight recession. Um, do you think there is a possibility that we remain in a freight recession? And if we are not still in a freight recession, how long do you think the actual duration of it ended up being?
It's tough, right? Just the duration question. So I don't think, barring economic calamity, right? So a macro recession or some major shock to the macro economy, it's really, there's no mechanism I can see that would allow us to have a repeat of 2023 and 2024. Too
Hmm.
much capacity has exited the market, right? So what I mean by why would a macroeconomic issue um, hold that not to be true? It was because you'd see a diminishment on the demand side, a substantial diminishment on the demand side. So barring that, we've attrited enough capacity, something like 35,000. I think latest numbers show 35,000 for hire interstate operating authorities have net attrited out of the market since October of 22. So I think in that regard, it's pretty unlikely that we spend all of this year in a similar fashion to how we spent 2023.
Okay.
Um, so I think if you're going to put a start date on it, and I think you and I have talked at length, I really hate the term freight recession,
Yeah,
even though I know it's been greatly
it's
popularized over the past couple of years.
right, right.
Um, Probably sometime in the fall of 22 is when I would say that it started. Um, Look, I think there's a lot of debate about this, right? And ultimately, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think if when it was first declared by some folks in the very, very early, well, late winter of 22, I
Yeah.
think if you would have went that day and shorted all major publicly traded transport stocks, by the end of the year, you would have been up to your eyeballs in margin calls and negative equity positions.
Yes. Absolutely.
So, things really started to slow down in the fall of that year. Peak wasn't great. And then things just continued to slide into 23. So for me, like if I had to encapsulate a year, the prior freight recession, if we're going to borrow that vernacular, would have been 2019, the calendar year.
Yeah.
This year would be 23, and then hopefully 24 is an improvement.
Okay. Good. Um, and then a few moments ago, Ken, you had mentioned fuel prices, diesel prices. We see what's going on in the Red Sea, and how that could be impacting fuel prices. If you look at the Energy Information Administration data from the United States Department of Energy, we've seen nearly in the neighborhood of 3% increases per gallon in each of the last 2 weeks. So that's coming off of a really long stretch of mostly declining prices. When you look at what's happening in fuel and potentially where the prices may be going, uh, how much of a concern is that as you view it within the rate world per se?
I mean, if I could, I'm sure if either of us could predict fuel prices with any degree of certainty, we wouldn't be doing our current jobs, right? We'd be retired on a beach somewhere.
Yes, yes.
So I think I don't expect it to be a huge, certainly not rising to the level of when Russia invaded Ukraine, a
Okay.
little over 2 years ago,
Yeah.
or a little under 2 years ago, I guess. But I also think, there's dynamics at play where we're on the hairy edge of profitability for most carriers still. And it doesn't take large movements, right? If we saw another Ukraine, I think we're probably upwards of 70 cents, depending on what pad you look at nationally. We're probably upwards of 70 cents off where we were last year in terms of
Yeah,
fuel prices on it.
that's very close to where it was. And the difference has been narrowing in recent weeks. Just a couple of weeks ago, I think it was 80 cents. So
Yeah.
it's
So if fuel
happening.
went up 80 cents right now, you would see a huge spike in carrier attrition, small carrier, like the ones that aren't on a fuel recapture program.
Yeah.
They don't have, um, at 80 cents at 6.5 miles per gallon, um, they don't have 12 cents of flex in their current operating models. So I think that's not a reason why it wouldn't happen. I'm just saying I don't think it'll happen for a lot of the reasons we just discussed. And if it did, it would be very, very bad.
Okay. Understood. Yeah, we'll have to see. Just have to see what happens there. Um, and Ken, this is sort of a repeat question from the last time we did a podcast together a while back, and I thought it was worth re-asking again. In just especially when you take into account what you just said about how February is usually slow. And just the question is really focused on the impact of seasonal events on rates. So, things like produce season, back to school, peak, what have you. You know, in terms of how those seasonal events do impact things, um, it, are there certain things that shippers or carriers need to take into consideration, be mindful of when those times come up, for example?
Yeah, so it's puts and takes, right? It's positives and negatives. So we're entering into that just categorically slow period, which is usually from the second or third week, usually second week of January, depending on how Christmas falls, to the second or third week of March is when you would see that spring related shipping activity really start to pick up.
Yes.
Now, there's something we're watching, which is I'm sure most of your listeners are aware, the flooding in Southern California, which is very similar to what happened last year, which put a major dent in the early produce shipping. A lot of those first plantings were ruined as a result of the flooding and just generally wet conditions, too wet to grow. So,
Yeah.
not something the market needs right now, but you would generally expect by early to mid March things to start picking up. And it's not just produce. You might think like I don't haul produce, but it's kind of like a rising tides lifts all ships. That's when your patio furniture, your barbecue grills, your anything that's going to come out of the winter and start shipping for the summer starts to move around. You've got retooling, you've got manufacturing that may have did their shutdown in February to clean and retool that starts back up. So there's a lot of things in spring that start waking back up. It builds until the 4th of July, generally speaking. And then you get into the summer vacation part of freight. And then as ocean shipping starts to make its way to the ports for, believe it or not, Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and the holidays, that will start the next part of the calendar.
Okay. Got it. Got it. Yeah. There's always something to be looking ahead to in terms of how it impacts business. In a moment ago, Ken, you had talked about how people in some cases need to or have considered private fleets or dedicated fleets as an option. Have you seen an increase in that in recent years? Just given going back to the pandemic with the scramble that was going on at that time, or have private and dedicated returned, in your opinion, to the more regular cadence that it's traditionally seen in the past?
No, it's increasing and it's going to
Okay.
continue to increase most likely. The last two shocks to the system, I think, really accelerated thinking on private and dedicated. Very much so on the private side. Dedicated, I think that one's a sticky wicket in a lot of ways as it pertains to like having price dedicated. It's way more of an art than a science to kind of come to terms on what is and what isn't dedicated.
Okay.
So in that regard, I'm not. I think the jury's out on the use of dedicated at them on the macro. But private, I mean, if you pull any of the major Fortune 500 publicly traded shippers
Mm-hmm.
that you might track because they like to talk about supply chain, like a Dollar General as an example,
Sure.
um, they've been talking about significant. Walmart is another example, significant increases, upwards of 20% of private fleet utilization. So
Oh,
that's not something that's going to go away, um, and I think it'll only become more attractive when interest rates come back down.
okay. Got it. Got it. And then a moment ago, Ken, you had mentioned uh sort of how 35, I think what was that stat, Ken? 35,000 for hire carriers have they exited the market going back to October
Net, yeah, that's a
net?
net.
Okay, wow. So that's a pretty big number. And then you look at sort of things leveling out. Is the market back in balance in terms of supply and demand, capacity, shipments? And I look at your load to truck ratio and the TV and the truckload volume index every month. I always find that very interesting. Where do things sort of stand at the moment in relation to capacity slash load to truck ratio data and things along those lines?
I'd say we're like very tenuously in a very fragile, I'm going to double hedge that, like very
Sure.
tenuously in a very delicate balance between supply and demand at the moment. Um, what evidence do we have of that? Well, we've been at a general bottom for quite a while. We've seen rates come up, depending on, and again, it's hard to generalize at a national level, but let's just say double digits, up over 10% in many of the popular shipping corridors since November,
Okay.
which isn't a lot. Like it certainly is not a lot. I wouldn't run to the hills with that excitement, but
Right.
you
Um,
know, so
no.
yeah, I think we're delicately in balance. And now the question is, as we continue, because we'll continue, like we're not going to immediately stop attriting carriers tomorrow. We've seen it slow down to the point where um, it's not getting worse, but we'll probably attrit another 3 to 5,000, which will put us. And I dare to say, I dare to use the S word shortage, but we'll probably have a little bit of a capacity shortage, especially in some of the major shipping lanes that get impacted by spring. I think in
Okay.
the end of Q1, early Q2. And
Right.
again, when I say shortage, I mean just on the very narrowest edge of just enough to drive rates up.
Right. Which was my next question. So yeah, that's just sort of the natural evolution there. That'll be interesting to play out, especially in advance of peak too. And I know we can never get enough of peak season talk, and here we are in February. But I have to ask, do you think we've sort of gotten to a point where peak season perhaps has fundamentally changed in a permanent way, especially over the last 3 or 4 years?
Um, I don't know. It's hard to say, right? It's kind of each year is different, I feel. It's certainly going to be busy, right? That time of the year is always going to be busy. I
Right.
think if we're still dealing with a Red Sea issue and things like that, that are clogging up east, not clogging up, that's the wrong way to think about it. I mean, we were talking to Larry Gross yesterday, and what it really more would manifest as is a slight shift back west, as away from the East Coast ports, if that continues. So if that happens, things could end up being a little bit different. But by and large, um, this will be my what, 13th peak in the industry coming up, and they're
Right.
all generally different, but they're all kind of the same in the sense that it gets really, really busy. There's going to be things that happen and go the way you expected them to go. There's going to be certainly things that happen and go a way you didn't expect them to go. But by and large, that's a time of the year you need to prep, and you need to be ready to to be nimble.
Okay. Got it. Got it. All right. Well, look, Ken, this brings us to the end of our allotted time for today's podcast. So, on behalf of Logistics Management Magazine and the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group, I'd like to say thanks very much for joining us again. It was really great to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our listeners, Ken is always posting a lot of interesting things on LinkedIn, a lot of data driven, a lot of interesting takeaways. I definitely would encourage you to check him out and find Ken Adamo on LinkedIn, Adamo. And for those of you on Twitter, please feel free to go ahead and check out DAT, simply at DAT Freight Team. And also, please feel free to go ahead and give us a follow on Twitter, simply at Logistics MGMT. And also, please go ahead and sign up for our podcast if you haven't already. Wherever you get your podcast, just go ahead and look for Supply Chain 24/7, and it should pop right up. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day, and we look forward to catching up with you next time.